Are you a first-time home buyer wondering which types of properties you should stay away from? Which types of properties should you absolutely never buy? My last video on this topic sparked an incredible response and got many of you sharing your own stories about different properties and different home buying pitfalls. And because of that amazing feedback and those experiences, I put together a sequel to that video to cover additional types of properties that you should stay away from. Your stories highlighted some hidden traps that can turn your dream home into an absolute nightmare. And today I want to spend a little bit of time and talk about those different types of properties. So hang with me as I arm you with the knowledge to not only avoid certain types of properties, but also to help you make better choices. Let's get started. Now, the very first type of property I want to talk about in today's video is something that a lot of you guys mentioned in the comments of my previous video. In fact, that's where all of this content is coming from today. I took the comments, I analyzed them, and came up with the top responses in order to make the sequel to this video. And the first one is a bit controversial in my opinion, and that's that you should never buy a home that's located close to a school. And the primary reason viewers were mentioning this was because of all the noise, the disruptions that come with being around a school. Every single morning, if you live in a neighborhood where there's a school, you're having to deal with traffic coming into the neighborhood. You're having to deal with that same traffic when school gets out. And in many cases, it can make your life extremely complicated, especially when you don't have kids that go to those schools. In addition to that, you're also going to have to deal with kids. Kids on e-bikes, kids riding all over the place, on the sidewalks, in the middle of the street. And I know this because I actually live really, really close to a school. And that's why I say it's really controversial. I love where I live personally because I can walk my kids to school every day. But at the same time, I have to cross a street that has a lot of traffic on it, people speeding in both directions. In addition to having kids, those same kids that I mentioned on e-bikes, yeah, they're in the middle of the street, they're riding on sidewalks, they're not paying attention to anyone or anything. And another thing you have to be aware of when buying a home that's close to a school is that it's likely going to be busy on the weekends as well, because these kids have practice. There's soccer practice, there's football practice, which means not only do you have a lot of kids there, you have parking and cars taking up space all over the place. And if those same teams practice at night, guess what you also have? Lights. And if you're close enough to that school, guess what? Those lights could be shining into your backyard, along with having noise come from all of those practices, people cheering and yelling. And for me, it doesn't matter. In fact, the house that I owned before the house I live in right now is in that same community, and it actually backed to a school. So we had the lights shining in the background. We had the people cheering. We had the kids yelling. And for us, it was a happy sound. It was a cool sound. We enjoyed hearing all the commotion, all the craziness that went along with it. But the guy we bought the house from absolutely hated it. And that's one of the things that he mentioned, was that there was a lot of noise that came from the school with kids and bells ringing and everything that comes along with it. So if you're planning on buying a home located near a school, just make sure you understand the pros and cons that come along with it. Yes, it can be a really good thing, but at the same time, it can also come with some headaches. And along the same subject, we had people comment saying that you should never buy a home near a fire station. And that's because you get the sirens, you get the loud calls in the middle of the night, you get everything that comes along with being near a fire station. And I completely understand that. But at the same time, there's also some benefits to that as well. If you're in need of a medical emergency, if something happens with a fire, you're really close to the fire stations. So when it comes to avoiding schools and fire stations, just make sure you fully understand both sides of it so that you can make the best decision for yourself. Now, the second thing I want to talk about today is something that we touched on briefly in the first video, but I want to make it extremely clear in today's video. But before we do that, I'd like to take a minute and ask a favor. If you find any value in my videos at all, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up. And if you want to stay updated on everything mortgage and real estate related so that you can become an expert in the home buying process, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Now, the second thing that I briefly touched on was buying a house without permits. Now, earlier in the first video, I mentioned buying flipped homes and talked about permits a little bit. But if you're buying a home that doesn't have permits, you have to understand what comes along with that. What I'm seeing right now as a real estate agent out there showing a lot of properties is people removing walls. They want that open concept when it comes to living. They want the kitchen and the dining room and the family room all open, which I completely understand. In fact, that's what I wanted in my own home. But before I did that, I went out and got plans and talked to an engineer and went down to the city and had it permitted. But here's the problem. A lot of people out there right now are avoiding all three of those first steps. They're not checking with an engineer, they're not getting plans, and they're not getting things permitted. And that's because those things are costly. They take time. When most people are doing remodels today, they're trying to do them quick. They're using contractors in many cases that aren't licensed. And because of that, you have a lot of shoddy work out there. I realize it may look good with the open concept, but understand, over time, if that's a supporting wall that you've removed and you haven't shored it up in any way, it's going to become a problem over the long run, especially if you have a second story on that home. In addition to that, I see a lot of homes that have unpermitted additions added to the back of the home. And over time, what I've seen is a lot of leaking, a lot of mold, a lot of issues with those room additions on top of settling and it becoming uneven. And all of this could be avoided if you just made sure the home was permitted before you purchased it. Now, something I want to mention here to be completely transparent, as a real estate agent who also owns property, has bought properties over my career, is I don't always go and make sure everything is permitted. There are things that I care about being permitted, and there are things that I personally don't care about. When walls are removed, I care about that because it affects the integrity of the entire home. If the water heater isn't permitted, if the air conditioning isn't permitted, that's not really a big deal for me. But as a buyer, you have to decide what's a big deal to you and what is not. Because I've had buyers that don't care about anything permitted, and I have other buyers that want every single thing permitted. So just understand the pros and cons of what is or what is not permitted so that you don't end up buying a home that becomes a financial nightmare. Now, the third thing I want to talk about is something that is happening here in Huntington Beach, and that's buying properties with easements. Now, you might be watching this going, Jeb, what is an easement? An easement is essentially a right to your property by someone else. So the easiest example for me to explain is, let's say you have a home and in the back of your yard there's a light pole and there's electricity connected to that pole, and there's a pole in your neighbor's yard, so they're connected, if you will. Well, an easement allows the utility company to actually come back there and work on that property. If something is affected, if something needs to be replaced, they have the right to actually come into that property. Now, easements can be a number of things. It can be a shared driveway, it could be the telephone company, it could be the cable company, it could be a sewer company, which is exactly what I want to talk about in today's video. It's not abnormal to buy a home that has easements. In fact, most single family homes, at least where I'm located, have some sort of easement, typically from a utility company. But the story I want to mention today is one that's happening here in Huntington Beach, where home buyers over 30, 40 years ago purchased all of these homes that back to a railroad track. And underneath the backyard of those homes, you had the sewer drain, if you will. The sanitation district had put sewer lines in there over 50 years ago. And so when these people bought these homes over that period of time, that easement was actually on the title report, which nobody had really paid attention to because many of these homes had been bought and sold multiple times over that period of time. Well, guess what recently happened? The sewer company actually came out and said that they now needed to replace that drain, which was like a 5 or 6 foot diameter drain underneath the backyard of all of these homes that spanned along this entire railroad track. Now, I don't remember the number exactly, but it affected something like 30 or 40 homes. And you're probably watching this going, okay, not really a big deal. They have to tear up the backyards in these homes. But here's where the issue lies. Many of those homes over that period of time had put in swimming pools, had built cabanas, ADUs, different things in the backyards. Not only did the easement never become an issue, the city actually permitted this. So you could say it's the city's fault. You could say it's the homeowner's fault for not understanding the easement. But either way, the utility company is making these homes remove those pools, remove everything in the backyard so they can actually come in there and do that work. So imagine as a homeowner, you just purchased one of these homes in the last couple of years and you've gone into the backyard and you've remodeled the pool and you've done all these nice upgrades to the backyard, only to find out it all has to be ripped out because you bought a home that has an easement essentially taking up half your backyard. So before you buy a home that has easements, just make sure you understand what those easements are and how they might affect you. Now, the next type of property you might want to avoid as a potential home buyer is those that are located near areas that are prone to flooding. Here in California, where I'm located, we're in flood zone A, or part of Huntington Beach is in flood zone A, which means it's not really prone to flooding immediately, but it is in a 100-year flood zone, which means it has the potential to flood every 100 years or so, which means it could happen within that time frame, or it could be longer, or it could happen multiple times. On top of that, you might want to stay away from homes that are close to lakes or creeks or ponds, anything that could overflow. When I was going to college at East Carolina University in 1999, we had Hurricane Floyd. And Hurricane Floyd was that 100-year flood where a good portion of the city near the college actually flooded all the way up to the second story. And not only did this ruin a lot of property, but it caused a lot of damage, both emotionally and physically. So just make sure when you're buying properties, you understand location. You can't pick a property up and move it in most cases. So you have to be okay with the surroundings. You have to understand what happens if there's wildfires, what happens if there's flooding, what happens if there's some sort of natural disaster, how your new home might actually fare in that condition. And yes, I realize you can get insurance to cover a lot of the things that we just talked about, but it's an extra premium. If things do happen, the premiums go up, it can become more expensive. So rather than having to deal with premiums, just understand what you're getting into so that you're not actually having to worry about what happens if something happens, if you will. Now, the last one I want to talk about was something that viewers mentioned quite a few times. And in fact, I just did a video solely on this alone, which I'll link to here, but it's buying homes in HOAs. Having issues with HOAs is that they were overly restricted, that there was too much politics, that there was no control, you couldn't control the fees, you couldn't do all of these different things. And yes, those are all things that you absolutely have to be aware of. But as someone that lives in an HOA, I also discuss the other side of those things, which if you want to know, you should check out that video. But either way, before buying in an HOA, just understand what you're getting into. Understand the CC&Rs, read through the financials, read through all of those documents so that you fully understand the community and everything that goes along with those rules and regulations so that you're not putting yourself in a bad position on buying a property that you might not like in the future. So before we wrap up today, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you who commented on that first video. In fact, I'm going to ask you to comment again. What additional types of properties should people avoid and why? And on top of that, how accurate were we in today's video? Were those things that you have a problem with? Do you not have a problem with? Let me know in the description below. And if you're wondering what we covered in the first video, the additional types of properties you should stay away from, do me a favor and check out this video here.